Hello, my name is Amber and welcome back again. I would like to share today a continuation on an earlier video that I released, which was called What is Pelvic Health? And I want to continue that conversation a bit today and look at, again, why are we concerned about pelvic health? How do we optimize it? And in particular, how is posture connected to our pelvic health? Okay, so in the first video, I was talking about getting familiar with your pelvic anatomy and in particular your bony pelvis. So we went through the whole bony pelvis and started to try to connect to our own pelvis and the anatomy of that. And what I want to talk about today is actually going inside the pelvis. So I mentioned before that the pelvis definitely is containing all of our reproductive organs, a lot of different muscles, ligaments, and fascia. And another important part of the pelvis is the pelvic floor, or the pelvic floor muscles. And I will give a different video where we talk in more detail on the pelvic floor muscles, but for now, just to know that if you were to look from the underside of the pelvis, the pelvic floor muscles are like a sheet of muscles that start from around the pubic bone, go to the two sitting bones, and to the tailbone. So they make this whole sheet of muscles. And if I had a better model, you'd be able to see that it covers pretty much the entire pelvic outlet. And if you were to look from the pelvic inlet, you would see where my hand is. This would be all pelvic floor muscles. And also on the outlet of the pelvis, here we know that for women we have 3 different openings. So we're going to have the urethra opening, the vagina opening, and the anus, and men have 2. And the pelvic floor muscles are really hugging around these openings. So if I just use my hands as a really simple demonstration, if you can imagine the hole that's between my hands, this would represent all the genital openings. And if you can imagine, the movement of the pelvic floor is going to be to hug around the openings, to relax, to hug around them, to relax. And so one of the functions of the pelvic floor is to be able to let things out and let things in. Okay? So it's definitely controlling all of our elimination, our ability to control our urges as well. And the pelvic floor is responsible for so many other functions too. It gives us sexual pleasure. It's holding the contents of all of our reproductive organs, the weight of that, and everything that's above is receiving the weight and stress as a baby is growing. It's able to hold that weight. It is a sump pump for venous flow return and lymphatic circulation. And uniquely, it's very connected to the respiratory diaphragm. And that's what I want to talk about today. There is a very interesting relationship between the respiratory diaphragm, which is that dome-like muscle that's found just at the base of the rib cage. Okay, there's a very interesting relationship between that, the respiratory diaphragm, and the pelvic floor. And in fact, the pelvic floor is sometimes called the pelvic diaphragm because they mirror one another. And it's this relationship that is so important for pelvic health. So let's talk about the diaphragm first. So if you imagine, I have my rib cage here, and here is our respiratory diaphragm at the base of the rib cage. When you breathe in, the diaphragm is going to descend, which allows the rib cage to expand, which then allows the lungs to draw the air in. So as the respiratory diaphragm descends, it's going to push against the abdominal organs, and even you may feel a little rise of the belly as it comes down. And as you exhale, the respiratory diaphragm lifts back into place, the rib cage returns to neutral, and the air is pushed out of the lungs. Okay, so we constantly have this movement of the respiratory diaphragm, in particular if we're breathing properly, doing diaphragmatic breathing. And it's continuously moving like this. And so the pelvic floor is doing the exact same thing. So if we shift our view a little bit, you can imagine that they are moving in unison together. So the pelvic floor is also like a trampoline of muscles. And when we breathe in and the diaphragm's descending down, the pelvic floor also starts to descend down to receive all the intra-abdominal pressure that's created. And as we exhale and the diaphragm lifts back into place, the pelvic floor follows. And so they're moving in concordance, moving in harmony with one another. And if you can think about it, we take 21,000 breaths a day. So that's 21,000 times a day that the pelvic floor has an opportunity to balance, to tone, to work on being able to lift as well as to release. Okay, we're exercising that muscle just through our breath. But for that relationship to work optimally, we need to have the right posture. We need to have the rib cage stacked right over the pelvis. Neutral rib cage, neutral pelvis. And that's why posture is such a powerful ingredient for pelvic health. It has one of the biggest impacts on our pelvic health because it's able to balance and tone the pelvic floor through our breath. Okay, so in the next few videos, I'm going to give some exercises on how can we find the right posture, how can we be sure we have the rib cage stacked over the pelvis, neutral rib cage, neutral pelvis, as well as how do we breathe, diaphragmatic breathing. And once we have these two pieces in place, then we can start to travel more deeply to look at Kegels and look at pelvic floor exercises and how to relax and how to activate the pelvic floor. But before we can do any of that, I really think the starting place is 1, visualize your bony pelvis, get familiar with your pelvis, and then also the fascia and muscles and organs, start to get a sense of your own body. And then 2, start to look at your posture, neutral pelvis, neutral rib cage, and then 3, start to learn how to breathe or remember how to breathe. So stay with me and these videos will be coming up soon. Thank you.